Hello, and welcome to the Uncommon Conversations podcast by Worldwide Clinical Trials. Today, we are excited to have Lars Wilde, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Compass Pathways, on the podcast. Let's start by having Lars introduce himself and give our listeners a general sense of his background regarding clinical trials. It's nice to meet you, Lars.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. My name is Lars Wilde. I'm Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Compass Pathways, a London-based life science company dedicated to accelerating patient access to evidence-based innovation in mental health care. Having said that, we're all about improving mental health through the development of really new patient care pathways. And in doing so, we very much focus on advances in neuroscience, psychotherapy, psychopharmacology, and technology. So we're very agnostic in terms of our focus. If we believe something offers real patient benefit, we would develop that. And having said that, our first major initiative is really developing psilocybin therapy for patients with treatment-resistant depression through late-stage clinical trials in the EU, the US, and Canada. And we do that with a team of roughly 25 people internally at the moment on both sides of the Atlantic. We're running 2 major trials at the moment, and we're setting up new trials as we speak.
That's great. Thank you so much for that introduction. For my first question, I really want to know what are some of the biggest issues that investors face when evaluating an investment? Additionally, in your experience, what are some of their hot trigger points or topics that they're facing?
Right, great question. And I think the most important one any VC has to answer. I think it always starts with the patient need. What really is the opportunity here? And as a venture capitalist, you would typically look at the unmet medical need in a given indication area. And one would look at what is the patient experience at the moment in this indication. The goal here is to arrive eventually at the question, how big is the problem we're dealing with? And then also looking at, is the problem growing or is it shrinking? Very specifically for Compass, that means we're dealing with a very large market. It's very quickly growing. It's a big unmet medical need, where for a third of roughly the patient population, which translates into 100 million patients globally, there is no viable treatment available. And then really investors look at, what other opportunities are out there, what else is in the pipeline of other pharma companies, of technological solutions. And then, if that comes back with a positive vote, I would say from the venture capitalists that they use typically external sources to answer those questions. If they don't have the in-house resources, which they typically don't have for every indication area, they have their own advisory boards that they work with. If that comes back positive, then they look at the risks. And I guess here, for us, it's pretty clear. Depression is a big unmet medical need. It's very costly for payer systems. So we completely check the box on this. But then we look at risks, and here it gets a bit more complicated. The risk in psychiatry typically has been in the last 30 years that innovation has been largely incremental. So there have not been any major large-scale breakthroughs since SSRIs have been discovered. In sub-areas of psychiatry, there has been progress, but not in a major indication area such as depression. And VCs are therefore seeing the indication area as somewhat risky. And then there are more specific risks as they relate to Compass. We're dealing with a drug compound that is a Schedule 1 drug that has had its own history in the 50s and 60s. After it has been researched and then escaped the labs and became part of the counterculture. That is clearly something that initially led to a couple of questions from investors, but that can easily be answered by data. So the VCs are very knowledgeable in that they very deeply look at the data to understand, are there any adverse events? What are the real risks? Are there physical risks? If so, how are they being dealt with? Luckily, we're dealing with a very safe drug. So in over 4,000 sessions in modern day research with psilocybin, there have not been any major adverse events. I think that was a big plus when regulators looked at this. When investors looked at this, and at the same time, investors look at are there any addictive properties, especially after the opioid crisis in the U.S. And knowing that psilocybin at the moment is a scheduled drug, that was a big question. And psilocybin, based both on animal and human data, seems to be somewhat anti-addictive. Actually, this came back very positive. And lastly, the last question that needs to be answered for an investor is then, okay, we understand the risks. We understand there's a big opportunity. Where would the treatment eventually fit into the care pathway? And here we are dealing with a genericized market with SSRIs as a first-line treatment in major depressive disorder, which is not the most attractive area to compete in, and therefore we fit much better into kind of a second, third-line treatment, where the treatment opportunities for patients really break down, the ones that haven't been helped by 2 bouts of SSRIs. And here we're dealing with a highly fragmented market with a lot of treatment opportunities, but none of them really are great for patients. And so overall, the benefit risk profile seems to be very attractive for investors.
So with that being said, what surprised you the most about the journey to securing an investment?
Right. What surprised me the most, I think there was a very positive surprise in that whoever we talked to, everyone was really open about mental health as a major problem that our global society is facing. And so there was major investor interest. Even if investors were not actively investing into the area of psychiatry, they were all very much aware of the problem and very helpful in making other contacts for us, opening doors for us. And I think the amazing thing that we managed so far is to have roughly 25 investors in Compass that all share our vision to really make a change in mental health, really bring change to patients and offer a viable new treatment opportunity that empowers patients. And so that clearly was a very positive surprise. I think if we talk about negative surprises, I would say that generally the field of psychiatry has been underfunded. Psychiatry sits within neuroscience, and due to many of I think there were over 200 late-stage trial failures in Alzheimer's, which led to big pharma to move out of the CNS space. Many of the players left the field, and that also led some of the VCs to leave the field. I think that was a surprise because we do understand the brain much better, and we're really beginning to understand what happens in depression, what happens in anxiety. We now have fMRI data that tells us what's going on under the influence of rapid-acting antidepressants. So we are actually making big scientific advances. I'm very surprised that the VC world was not as excited. That has now changed. I mean, we're now active in this field for over 3 years, and we really see a lot of VC interest. We're being approached once a day at the moment by investors looking actively at the space, and I think that gives us a lot of confidence going forward.
Fantastic. Who did you find were your more effective partners throughout the process and the journey?
Right. So I think I have to talk a little bit about my co-founder, George, here, who is all about stakeholder involvement. George really believes deeply into cooperation, and that is reflected in everything we do at Compass. So we're working with a multitude of stakeholders that have become very effective partners for us. That starts very practically on the manufacturing side and our logistics and supply partners. But then we also have a broad team of both scientific, business, legal advisors that work with us on a daily basis. As I said, we also have 25 investors involved. And really every one of those partners shares our vision to transform outcomes for patients in mental health care. And along those lines, I think we're very proud to be partnering with Worldwide, with what has been an excellent partner. And we've been through a very rigorous selection process with one of our advisors that has been a very successful drug developer. We looked at many CROs, and in the end, Worldwide had one with a large margin over everyone else, and that has been confirmed over the past 2 years in our interactions. I think you share really the commitment that we have in putting patients at the center of everything we do. We really feel that reflected in the work we've been doing together. At the moment, we're still a small startup, and we couldn't do it without a partner as Worldwide. And so it's really reassuring to have you on our side with the extensive reach that you have on both sides of the Atlantic, and also the deep experience in our area of interest, really running clinical trials in psychiatry. For us, if I think of our clinical team led by Sue Stansfield, she always says that, we're really one team, and you're not only a supplier to us.
Well, thank you. That was very kind of you. We really appreciate those comments and that feedback. For my next question, how did you approach the creation of your presentation to investors?
Right. Well, I think I was in the fortunate position that I have worked on the side of the investors first, very early in my career as a healthcare private equity investor. So I at least haven't had an idea of what a presentation would have to look like. But then we also, again, as in everything we do, we talk to our advisors, we talk to our network of experienced biotech investors to really get a good grasp of what VCs would be expecting from us. And I also talked to some of my venture capital friends to have a good idea of what our presentation would have to look like. And I think every good presentation should start with a strong vision. And our vision is really to change mental health care and bring positive change to patients. And I think that is an important one, and that's what we want to see every investor buy into, that makes an investment in the company, that we share that common vision. I think then it's followed by lots of data. So we really look at, first of all, the size of the problem. I mentioned we're talking about, at the moment, 320 million depressed patients globally based on the World Health Organization's data. And we know from the STAR*D trial that was done in the US that roughly a third of those are actually in treatment-resistant depression, which leaves us with a potential target market size of 100 million, which is one of the biggest markets overall in medicine, really. And I think from there we looked at what the early clinical trials have shown. We looked at what we understand from neuroscience of how rapid-acting antidepressants work, especially in the class that we're in, where psilocybin works in the serotonin system on the serotonin 2A receptor. And so we spoke about the mechanism and the hypothesis of why psilocybin has been such a strong candidate in early stage research. And then really from there extrapolated how our development program needs to look like to successfully navigate the regulatory processes in both the US and in Europe in treatment-resistant depression, especially also emphasizing why we're focusing on treatment-resistant depression and not simply on MDD as a first indication, but then also giving an outlook of where we think psilocybin as a transdiagnostic tool in psychiatry could be taken. And then it's really showing credibility. So as I said, we have an amazing internal team with vast experience in neuroscience and as entrepreneurs and medics, etc. And then we also have a very extended team of which you form part. And so we share some of the successes of our partners and the backgrounds of our scientific advisory board. So the goal really is for someone to look at this presentation, and after reading through it, which roughly takes an hour, I would say, to just flip through it without going in depth, to have a good overview of what Compass is all about, who's involved, what we're doing, what our goals over the next 5 to 10 years are. And that has worked very well for us.
That's great. For my final question, do you believe it's correct to assume that your therapy is potentially transformative?
Right. Yeah, I think we believe the drug can be transformative. We hope it will be transformative, but we are also very well aware that we have to prove this and generate the science that shows how effective psilocybin really is, because it has never been tried in a large dose-finding study in treatment-resistant depression. We're very lucky that Robin Card-Harris, one of our partners, who's a professor at Imperial College London, has conducted a very interesting pilot study with 19 treatment-resistantly depressed patients that generated amazing data, but that is 19 patients. Now we're talking about 216 patients in Europe, in the US, and Canada, and we're underway in, at the moment, I believe it's Ireland, the Netherlands, UK, Canada, and the US, and there are more sites to follow. And we know that typically effect sizes go down in larger trials, and so we're still very confident that psilocybin will hold up and will be a very effective antidepressant, but we're really about the science. And so if we would definitively prove that psilocybin does not work for patients, it would be a very disappointing outcome, but still a acceptable outcome for us, in that we really want to prove, test the hypothesis that psilocybin is a treatment in treatment-resistant depression. Then I think when we talk about transformative, it's a very different treatment from what we know right now in psychiatry. And I think that's important to understand. I came to start Compass with my co-founders, Katya and George, as a patient. I myself have been suffering from generalized anxiety disorder and depressive episodes, and have been on standard care treatments in psychiatry, and they didn't work for me. At the same time, they had severe side effects for me. So I know how disabling those treatments can be, and they're definitely not empowering. And I think that's where psilocybin therapy could be potentially very different, because you're not on a chronic dosing scheme. It's a drug therapy combination. That's important to point out here. You're not taking just another pill. And so here it's all about the patient experience, where a patient is prepared by a therapist for the session, and then there's a dosing day in which the patient takes psilocybin under the supervision of two therapists that guide that person through the experience and are there for them. And then there's follow-up therapy to integrate that experience. And what's remarkable here really is that data from UCLA, NYU, and Johns Hopkins has shown that for many patients, the experience of this treatment is amongst the five most meaningful experiences of their life. And very few people claim that about SSRIs. So I think this speaks to the potential of psilocybin to be a great one-off treatment, or at least an irregular treatment for patients if the effect size goes up. And yeah, I think we have the responsibility now to get this right and do the study well. That's why we decided to partner with you. That's why we decided to run such a large trial to definitively answer this question.
Fantastic. Well, that's really, really nice to hear. So thank you. And to wrap things up, I guess I just want to say thank you again, Lars, for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate all this information and you sitting down for this interview. If anybody would like to contact Worldwide for more information, we encourage you to visit worldwide.com for more information, and we will put you in touch with the right people. Thanks so much.